So as this is a webinar, your video and audio have been disabled, but you will also have the full use of the chat and the Q&A functions for the duration of the webinar. And I would like to ask you all to just briefly introduce yourself in the chat so we can see who's here, and our panelists will know a little bit about you if you're asking a question. You can ask questions anonymously though, if you would prefer to do that. We'll aim to answer as many questions as possible in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar, but any questions that we don't get round to, we'll take away, and we may be posting a blog piece around any of those questions further on. So without further ado, we'll move on to the main bit of the webinar. So flooding is one of the most pressing challenges facing our landscapes, farms and communities. Solving flooding issues for individuals and communities requires everyone to be involved, and it requires multiple strategies from land management to hard engineering. This session tonight will explore how natural flood management, or NFM, uses nature-based solutions can help us reduce risk and build resilience. You'll hear from first-hand experiences from two of our farmers, Debbie and Rhys, who've successfully integrated natural flood management onto their farm, plus insights from Pete Leeson at the Woodland Trust on the wider implications of historic land management and climate change. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, who's Debbie Wilkins. Debbie farms at Norton Court Farm in the Severn Vale, Gloucestershire, where she's passionate about regenerative farming and soil health.
Sorry, just getting my sharing right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening. So as Lottie said, I farm in Gloucestershire in the Severn Vale. We're a mixed farm with dairy, beef and arable. And we have a kind of mixture of types of ground. So some of our ground is floodplain from the Severn, which can flood over the winter and can be underwater for a reasonable length of time. Some of our ground, we have the River Chelt from Cheltenham comes through, and we all get flash flooding from that, which will come up quickly and then go quickly. And then we have the ground which is higher that doesn't flood, and if it did, I think we'd need to build an ark. So I just wanted to go through a little bit kind of general. So for me, I think kind of the flood management starts with the soil, and it's something that every farm has in common. And I kind of see the soil as kind of nature's sponge. And if we can increase that soil health so that we have high organic matter and good structure to it, it can absorb that rain and prevent the runoff. But that also gives resilience to the farm, so that better soil health allows me hopefully to keep animals out longer because they can cope with wetter conditions in the autumn and winter, but also gives me resilience to drought conditions. And I really look at the kind of your standard soil health principles to try and improve that soil health on farm. So, that living root always in the ground. So I'm a big fan of having permanent pasture, but where we have arable ground, we put cover crops in between arable rotations. Have that diversity. So rather than having a plain ryegrass field, I'll try and have mixed sward and herbal lays. I put cover crops in, they're multi-species as well. And armour that soil, so when I'm grazing or going into longer covers and also coming out and leaving quite a bit of cover there. And likewise, when cutting for hay or silage, try not to completely sculpt it so that there's some cover for that soil. That also protects the biology of the soil from sun and rain and that kind of things. But also when you have rain events, if you've got that armour on the soil, it allows the rain to kind of soak into the grass or whatever it is, and then down the roots and into the ground. Whereas if you've got like a bowling green taken down on that grass, it can just run off. And then, disturbance, a lot of people talk about for soil health, and most people think about that as kind of reducing ploughing and direct drilling. But I think about it further than that. It's still chemicals that you put on there, whether that's fertilizer or pesticides. But on a livestock farm, I'm also thinking very much about the wormers that I use, the fly treatments, how those affect the soil biology, and how that's going to affect the soil health. And the other thing that is, for me, very important is in integrating livestock into the whole farming rotation. This is a picture of some of our farm, the fields to the bottom right are some of my meadows. So like I said, there's a mixture on the farm of different types of fields. So these are fields in the floodplain from the Severn, in kind of on the horizon in the distance, you can see the Severn, and the line down the middle is an old canal bed. So some of these fields can be a couple of miles from the river, but still go underwater. So these are always flooded. Can't stop the water coming. We have some fields that flood less often, only when it's like a really bad big flood. And we have some that are flash flooding. Anything that floods, I've tried to move away from having arable crops in there. We used to put spring crops on fields that flooded in winter, but that meant that I had bare stubble on those fields during the winter, during those flood events, which I didn't feel was good for the soil or for the silt and everything that got removed. So I now try and have permanent pasture on all the fields that flood. Some of those that I planted recently will be going down to herbal lays, and I very much try to get a mix of species that can cope with flooding. Found that ryegrass doesn't like being flooded, whereas meadow fescues and timothy can cope better. I found that chicory, bird's foot trefoil, and plantain can all do quite well as well. And red clover seems to be okay with flooding. So it's very much trying to be resilient so that those fields can cope with being flooded and come back afterwards. So focusing on the floodplain meadows. So these are some of my fields. So the top right is the field underwater, and the bottom right is the same field where the water has drained off. And what you get left behind is the silt, so that especially because these fields are quite a long way from the river and the water can sit there for quite a long time, the silt will drop out and cover these fields. So that has disadvantages and advantages. The advantages are, that fertility from further up the catchment is being dropped out onto my fields. Disadvantages, it's kind of covering the surface, and some of those plants there have been killed off. But these floodplain meadows have been like that for generations. They don't get reseeded, and we don't need to do anything for them to recover from the flooding. The natural seed bank will reseed them. Some plants have really deep tap roots, like Great Burnet, and they can come back. We have some things that come back very quickly, like autumn hawksbit, and some of the grasses take a couple of years before they're back. And after big flood events, it can take a while for them to reach stability again. But normally, after even a bad flood year, we are back to the glorious meadows that they are in the summer, with a variety of different grasses, herbs, and forbs there, and they have brilliant for wildlife. But to be part of the farm and to be in the farming system, they have to also function and produce food. So we cut them for hay, and my cows love the hay from there. It might not have the protein and the ME of a really good silage, but it has all those different herbs and things in it, and I think the phytonutrients and minerals it has in there are really good for the cows. One important thing about taking the hay off is that nutrient that is deposited on those meadows. If we don't take it away, then it will build up, and some of those plants that want to grow there will be dominated by kind of the more thuggish plants that can cope with the higher nutrient levels. So we need to remove that hay each year to keep that nutrient level down and keep that diversity of plants there. These meadows, before we had fertilizer, were prized as great place to grow forage because of their fertility. And I think using them in part of the farm is really important. We also graze these fields, but it is important for me that not all the farm floods. I have to have the balance. So if I had everything that was floodplain meadows, then I wouldn't be able to farm. So I have areas where stock can go where it floods, areas where I can make silage, areas where I can grow arable land. So I'm lucky to be able to have that balance. But generally, for me, the meadows are my favourite place. They're full of life, and like I say on here, they're good for the mind and the soul. So I hope I've not missed out anything, but I might well have. But feel free to ask questions.
Thanks, Debbie. I think that's a really kind of positive note to leave your presentation on. It's amazing to see how well those meadows do recover, considering the levels of flooding that you actually see. So it's really great to see that. So we're going to move up the hill for our next speaker, and we'll hear from Rhys Evans. Rhys is the Wales manager at the Nature Friendly Farming Network and also farms with his parents and brother on the family's hill and mountain farm land in North Wales. So Rhys will talk about some of the actions that he's taking as an upland farmer.
Thanks, Lottie. Just checking, can you see my screen? Is that sharing all right?
Yes,
Yeah?
we can see
Okay.
it, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, diolch Lottie. Thanks for the invitation to speak this evening. Yeah, I'm here really because we've been involved in a sort of collaborative landscape scale natural flood defence and kind of water quality scheme over the last few years. And so we're going to talk really a bit about kind of the interventions that we've put in place on our farm and what our neighbours have done as well, and to talk a bit about some of the plans we have for the future as well. So just to give you a bit of background, if you don't know where Rhydymain is, shame on you. It's in North Wales. It's in Meirionnydd, near the town of Dolgellau. So our work focused on the River Union. So ourselves and 11 of our farm neighbours involved in a project with the Eryri National Park and Gwynedd Council, and it was funded by the Welsh Government. And it was all about kind of implementing natural flood management measures on the farm, really. And the kind of scheme came about, really. I think the council and the national park had this pot of money and thought instead of basically using that kind of flood defence money on hard engineering in sort of coastal urban areas, how about kind of redirecting that money up the hill and trying to kind of slow the flow of water at source in the upland. So yeah, that was the kind of idea behind it. Um, just to give you a bit of background on the farms, we can mainly beef and sheep enterprises, ranging from right at the valley bottom on the banks of the Union River up to the summits of the Aran Fawddwy, which is the highest mountain in Wales, kind of outside of the sort of Snowdonia, kind of Snowdon area up in North Snowdonia. Um, and the farms, kind of a combined total of around 2,500 hectares of land. I think we look more like a boy band cover album than kind of farmers working hard. So, but I do like that. Do like the pictures. So yeah, kind of what did we do? We did quite a bit of hedgerow planting, 7 kilometers over the winter in total. So that equates to around 50,000 trees ish. And we kind of tried to be strategic in where we planted the hedgerows, kind of across slopes to try and slow the flow of water, reduce runoff, and catch that water and slow it down on its journey into the river. Also hedgerows next to water courses to act as a buffer, and again kind of trying to kind of prevent flooding of some of the kind of lower flat fields. And we've also did a kind of a modest amount, I guess, of woodland planting as well. Again, trying to target areas that kind of low biodiversity value and also of kind of lower agricultural value as well. So, kind of areas of dense bracken, like the example on the left there. And we fenced off quite a considerable area, 4 hectares in total, of kind of protecting woodland, kind of ravines and riparian corridors as well. And then we've created ponds, 11 new ponds created across the farms, kind of slowing down the flow of water. And I always say kind of we live in a very wet part of the country. We've got lots of lakes and streams, rivers, ditches, but actually kind of ponds, smaller areas of kind of standing water. It's actually quite a rare habitat. So it's nice to kind of to create these 11 ponds and create a bit of variety, if you like, in the landscape. And combined, that stores around kind of 6.91 million litres of water. I mean, it sounds like a hell of a lot of water anyway. Can't really kind of quantify it in my mind. But you do see kind of during periods of heavy rainfall, kind of they do fill up and kind of slow the flow of water, which is great. That's what they're kind of designed to do. And then some sort of in channel works as well, sediment traps and boulder placement designed to reduce erosion and slow the flow of water. And up on the hill, a bit of peatland restoration, blocking 3.5 kilometers of drainage ditches on the peat, kind of helping that kind of the upland act like more of a sponge, instead of allowing all that water to kind of drain off quickly during periods of high rainfall. So, I mean, I guess I'd be the first to say that, those interventions aren't particularly new or revolutionary. But I think adopting or implementing, a suite of nature-based solutions across multiple farms, I think that's the kind of uniqueness of the scheme, really. And I'll talk a bit in the Q&A, around the kind of process and how we went about kind of designing the scheme and the relationship between ourselves, the farmers, and and the staff. And I think also, it's kind of designed for water quality and flood defence in mind, but looking at kind of what we've done, there's biodiversity benefits, carbon storage benefits, kind of air quality benefits, and also, kind of the place is easier to farm now as well. Kind of the ditches up on the peat, you would lose livestock, sheep, falling into the ditches. So, kind of mortality rates up on the hill have decreased. So that's great. Sort of the examples of the fences here, kind of we've been able to basically kind of invest in new kind of boundaries for the farm. And I'll talk a bit in the next slide what that will help us hopefully to do. And you kind of shade and shelter and stuff for the livestock, and generally kind of safeguarding the farm and trying to future proof it in a changing climate, so that their farm business benefits as well. And we're all in the uplands, kind of the water doesn't generally kind of stay on our fields. They might stay kind of in the valley bottom, but most of the fields, within these farms are on slopes. But it's the likes of Debbie down in the floodplains that kind of really suffer most, I think, kind of because all that kind of water congregates there. So, if we can play our part in slowing that water down and kind of future proofing other farming systems down on the coast and the lowlands as well, then that's great. So this is my last slide, and it kind of speaks to Debbie's first slide, I guess, around kind of the soil acting a kind of nature's sponge, if you like. So we have put a bid in, and we're waiting to hear any moment. A scheme in Wales called the Integrated Natural Resource Scheme, which just kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It's a Welsh Government scheme of farmers working together on a landscape scale again, and a subset of our group basically is looking to sort of adopt or trial regenerative grazing on our farms. And this image here kind of illustrates what we want to achieve as part of that scheme. So what you have here is a rainfall simulator, and you've got three soil profiles, if you like. You've got one that has been continuously grazed, so set stock. So if you're unaware of the jargon or the lingo, sort of continuous grazing or set stocking kind of essentially means that a pasture or a paddock or a field has been grazed continuously, really throughout, particularly throughout the growing season, with very little or no rest. And then the second soil profile from a field that has been rotationally grazed. So that's where stock grazing the land for a period of time, they'll be taken off and then sort of reintroduced at a later date. And then the furthest soil profile is with pasture with longer recovery period. So that might be sort of mob grazing or tall grass grazing, where kind of intense period of grazing followed by a very long recovery period. And it kind of, so it's all about kind of how we manage livestock, really. And with continuous grazing, the issue there really is that there is no rest for the pasture. So what happens then is that the animal continuously grazes on the grass and kind of multiple bites of the plant leaf, throughout the growing season, which means suppressing root growth essentially. So you're essentially kind of eating the roots, and the roots aren't given time to re-energize and regrow between bites of the leaf, really. Whereas you do get that with rotational grazing and mob grazing as well. So within that kind of first tab number 3 there, you can see kind of the water's poured into the soil profile. Then in the forefront you have your runoff tub, so there's considerable amount of runoff from the continuously grazed soil profile, and there's very little infiltration. So kind of showing that that the soil isn't really acting like a sponge. There's compaction there, which means the water runs off. And I noticed the color as well. It's brown, so you're losing lots of nutrients and soil, which is the kind of the most essential components really of any farming system. And then within the rotationally grazed soil profile, there's considerably less water in that runoff tub, which means that the the ground is acting like more of a sponge, and there's considerably more water in that infiltration tub, and the color is lighter as well, so you're losing less soil and nutrients off the farm. And then, kind of slightly, better performance yet again in tub number one with the sort of mob grazing with a longer rest period. And you'll also notice that there's actually less water in the infiltration tub because the water is still kind of in the soil, so the soil is kind of acting like a sponge. So that, yeah, kind of adding to what Debbie was talking about at the beginning, really, sort of how we manage livestock and grazing can have an effect on sort of natural flood defence. And if we get the funding, we will put a regenerative grazing system in place and get support to invest in the capital works in order to kind of implement those. So that might mean kind of fencing, electric fencing, getting water to fields and paddocks as well. So I'm really excited. I hope we get it, and maybe in 5 years' time I can come back and tell you if it's worked. But that is all for me. Happy to take questions at the end. Yeah.
Thanks, Rhys. That was just really informative, and it's really stark to kind of see the differences in terms of runoff and things, and that just really makes it clear that kind of changing grazing management practices and also adding in these kind of buffers that you were talking about with your hedges and woodland is really vital to kind of help the likes of Debbie in the lowlands in terms of the amount of flood risk that they will be getting as well. So it's just really great to see what you and your group have been up to. So our final talk of the night is from Pete Leeson of the Woodland Trust. Pete has worked for the Woodland Trust for over 3 decades and is an advocate for regenerative approaches to farming, working with farmers and commons in Cumbria and the Northwest. Living in Cumbria, Pete has seen the effects of major floods in 2004, 2009 and 2015 and is very much alive to the threats to lives and livelihoods that flooding brings. So I'll hand over to you now, Pete.
Thank you very much, Lottie. Can you see my slides?
We can, yes.
Super. Okay. So hello, everybody. It's always interesting coming third in something like this because you get to think about the nature of the conversation before you. So I'm hoping to pick up on some of the points that both Rhys and Debbie made. This first slide is I think indicative of the fact that catchments can be any size. And if we're talking about the River Severn, that's a massive catchment, but catchments can be any size and any location. And it almost goes without saying that the person at the bottom of the catchment is the one taking all the water. So here is a classic situation in Cumbria, as Rhys described there, which is a set stocked situation above the boundary here. And there's a very compacted soil. That soil is not rested. And when water hits that, as it commonly does, it very rapidly comes into the neighbour's land. Actually, what this neighbour has done has been to allow that water to spread out in the floodplain, and they're storing a lot of water on their site. But the impact is clearly on the downstream farmer here, and I think that sort of goes without saying almost, but worth thinking about. Why is that not moving forward? Sorry. Oh, there we go. So, what is natural flood management really about? I think it's the maximising the use of vegetation and land features to intercept, use, or evaporate water, and all of those are possible interventions. Slow down water flows and store water. And if you think about a flood situation, storage of water is a really critical part of the process. So unless we're storing water somewhere in the catchment, then we're not really going to impact on the sorts of floods that we saw with Debbie's land. We can slow down water flows. That's really important. Slowing down water might mean the same amount of water goes through a catchment. But if we slow it down, we might do one or two things. We might reduce the peak flows, and it's peak flows that often do the damage. We might give people downstream more time. If we slow down the flow upstream, we might give those people below us more time to move stock, to prepare for that floodwater. And even an hour or two can be really useful, particularly if you're moving stock out of a field. Natural flood management is going to be of increasing importance, already important, but it's going to be increasingly important with climate change. In Cumbria, where I live, we are predicted to have about 40% or more rain in the future, potentially between 2050 and 2070, with climate change. So I've suffered 3 separate flooding events in Keswick. My house hasn't been flooded, but I've got neighbours that have been flooded in the last 20 years or 22 years. And it's a really significant human cost as well as a financial cost and a landscape cost. And we're predicted to have 40% more going forward. So changing the landscape to be more resilient to flooding is absolutely key for the future of farming and for communities in the uplands and also in the lowlands. We're also told that the rain will arrive in shorter, heavier bursts. And that's an important factor, because if we're thinking about those different attributes of a flood situation, storing water, evaporating or using water, or slowing the flow, then thinking about how rain arrives is really, really critical. So if it arrives as a short, heavy burst, we have to do a lot of different things quite quickly to stop that from having an impact lower down. So it's about volume, scale, and timing. So unless we store or slow or use water at large volumes, we don't impact on the floods. As I've just said, timing, slowing flows can extend or flatten that worst part of the flood, which is very often the peak. And NFM can really, and natural flood management can really make a difference. So if we think about volume, scale, and timing, those are all important factors in this process. So delightfully, Debbie really gave us some important factors of healthy soil there. So decompacted, and that's through taller grasses, deeper roots, decompacting your soil so they are more aerated. Increase in the soil organic matter, really important. Taller grasses, longer roots, and a lot of that's derived from the stock you're using and your grazing style. If you have to plough, then think about how you're ploughing. So you can go up and down the contour or along the contour. So contour ploughing, where you're ploughing around the contour, can hold water in the event of a flood. It can hold sediments and soils as well better. So think about where you're ploughing and what you're doing with your plough. Ponds. Rhys showed us some really fantastic ponds there. And I love ponds from all sorts of angles, particularly biodiversity sense, and ponds are great. We've actually created in my locality, we put about 8 ponds locally through our projects just very recently. Ponds are fantastic biodiversity, but they only work for natural flood management if they hold water and then allow it to be released. Because once a pond is full, it's full. So adding more water to it ain't going to do any good whatsoever. So you've got to have a pond which releases water slowly, and ideally over an 8 to 12 hour period. So think about temporary release of water, temporary holding and temporary release of water. We've done a lot with leaky dams. I think everyone's aware of leaky dams these days, but ditches with leaky dams can be really effective. You want to drain the land, you want to get the water off the land, but if you hold it temporarily in your ditch with a leaky dam, then you can notch back that water flow. And in a high flow event, that can be really significant in terms of storage of water. And it's storing water that's the critical thing. Trees and hedges. I'm a tree person. I've worked with Woodland Trust for a long time, so I would say this, but trees are fantastic, hedges are fantastic at slowing the flow, using water and creating aeration in soils through the roots. So that percolation of water going down underneath the hedge is really important. Interesting, when we had our last flood in Keswick, I went up the valley a couple of days later, and there were 2 or 3 really significant hedges where they were perpendicular to the flow of the water. The water had come up and hit the hedge, and you can sense the massive damming effect that hedge had. So hedges in the right place, which is slowing the flow against the flow, can be really effective. Rougher vegetation. Again, Debbie pointed out the taller grass that she's got in her sort of longer lays there. Rougher vegetation is fantastic for slowing the flow physically, but also in re-evaporation. And it also goes without saying that in a catchment sense, we need to start at the top of the hill. So where Debbie is, she's in the floodplain. You can store an awful lot of water in a floodplain. That is what it's there for. This field here is the one we saw earlier. The stream is actually on the left-hand side. This landowner has cut little V-notches in what was an old barrier to the water flow to allow water onto their field. This is a very small field, but it's extremely effective in their locality, and they've got houses below them that have flooded in the past. So even storing small amounts of water can make a difference downstream. So this little I'm no artist, and I do apologise about my artistry, but this is my wee diagram of a hedge plant or a tree. And this is the sort of if you like, the science of what those trees and hedgerow plants are doing individually in the landscape. We can see the rain comes down from the top. The tree does various things even before the rain hits the ground. One is evaporate water. Nick Chappell at Lancaster University did some experiments with water flows over trees, and he showed that unless the relative humidity is 100%, in any rainfall event, trees will evaporate water back into the atmosphere in any event. And that's even with no leaves on the trees. The surface area of the tree is huge, so it will re-evaporate water before it hits the ground. A similar thing is interception. That water hitting the tree is slowed down because it runs down the tree to the ground. So even that interception can be quite a big storage area of water. And trees, particularly in the summer, transpire water. So they're using water all the time. So those are the sort of things in the canopy. If you've got flows over ground, the roughness of trees and scrub, hawthorns, those things that Rhys showed us that he'd been planting on his farm, the roughness in catchment can hold back flows. And at soil level, you have at least two things going on. One is percolation. So that percolation allows water hitting the surface to go down through the roots. Every root has little pockets of air. That's how they effectively breathe. Those little pockets of air can be temporary storage and allow water into the soil rather than running over it. And that soil condition, soil storage, is aided and abetted by the tree losing its leaves in the winter. Those leaves are picked up by worms. Those worms take that material down to the ground, and that carbon store, that organic store, helps to condition the soil to accept more water. This is in Wales. This is a really good illustration of something. It's also a very bad illustration of it, but it's a photograph that's easily understood. This is what they actually do in Australia for storing water, which is a horizontal swale. It stores water and allows, in an Australian sense, that water to percolate back into the ground because it slows the flow. We can do things like this with our ditches, which is to hold water in our ditches. And we're talking about flooding now, but we also have this sort of drought issue as well. So storing water, keeping water in and on your land can actually be quite a positive thing as well. So in terms of what we're talking about natural flood management across the whole piece, we are going to see more flooding in the future. The sorts of things we could do on the farm, which Rhys and Debbie have shown, we need to do across the whole catchment. And if every farm, every landowner did a little bit of this, whether it's ditches or with ponds or hedgerows or tree planting, then those simple measures that we talked about, they're not challenging, they're not difficult, they all add up. And it's interesting, just on the soils thing alone, if we could get soils working for our stock and our stock management, soil can hold a huge amount of water. And the Soil Association reckons it's about 1.5 Olympic swimming pools per hectare. So that soil is a significant part of the deal. And that's what you want to be farming better anyway. So our experience in the uplands, similar again to Rhys, this is a big area of common. We worked with the T-Bay commoners and other commoners to do natural flood management measures on their common. This is about the photograph on the left is the top of T-Bay Gill, which goes down to T-Bay Village. If you know the M6, you'll go through T-Bay. This is a series of check dams in the peat at the top of the hill. The peat was restored around these check dams. The dams were put into old eroded gullies. The gullies, as you can see, after 2 or 3 years are revegetating. But these dams notch back that water flow and store a lot of water and slow it down exactly where it falls. Just in the back here, just to the right of John, you can see a little white and black thing here. That's a rainfall gauge and a flume, and I'll talk more about that just in a second. And this is Graham, just a wee bit further down the same gill, looking at the tree planting we've done, looking at the increased vegetation there. We now think this gill planted in this way has stopped the village of T-Bay below flooding, just with the increased roughness. This is what that flume looks like. So I'm holding the telemetry system there. We've got a rain gauge. We have a very clever device there that sends back the data from over the flume. The flume is to my left, that black thing there. That's measuring water flow off this area of common. And we can see very clearly how connected water flow off the common is to rainfall events. And T-Bay Common is directly connected. So when it rains, the water flows off. There's some stats about this experience at T-Bay. This is common land, and we got the farmers to agree to the scheme, and they really support this scheme. It's been very effective. That's some of the technical stuff that comes out of these studies. And you can show, it's a very technical slide, but basically what it's showing is when it rains, there's water in the gullies, and those gullies lose that water very rapidly. And so the check dam we've got there on the left is slowing that flow down. I'm aware of the time. So what happens when we do this from a wildlife perspective? So the T-Bay experiment has been fascinating in terms of water, but it's also showing that we've got many, many more birds and beetles and bats back. So at T-Bay, in 10 years, we've been measuring this every year. We've gone from 5 breeding bird species present in our interventions to 14. And we've increased the bird territories from 25 when we arrived to 88 territories. So 3 times the territories and 3 times the different species of birds. Massively important. Lots more insects. And we've now got the green hairstreak butterfly back, which we'd lost. And that's because of the changing vegetation. And in particular, the green hairstreak is the bilberry. So these interventions can also really work for wildlife too. Funding picture, uncertain at the moment. SFI was really helpful. It's coming back in June for small farms. Rhys said some of these things are really simple interventions, but they're really effective. Putting hedges in, taking the odd field corner out, putting trees in, or allowing that to get rougher. These sorts of things, grassland management, if you can get into a sort of low input grassland and manage that mob grazing wise, really, really effective for storing water. We think NFM options might be in the higher tier options. We're not quite sure yet. But all the sorts of simple things we've talked about, you can achieve. This final slide, I thought this might be worth sharing. Government policy towards natural flood management is changing. There will be more investment in natural flood management going forward. And I think Rhys has experienced that in Wales. The difficulty for Environment Agency in England has been that hard engineering is always easier to measure the effects of than soft engineering. So what we're talking about here with NFM is soft engineering, but it does look as though government is behind us. So that's the last of my slides.
Thanks, Pete. That was really interesting. I think it's great to kind of see how the kind of combined approaches of what Debbie's been doing in her floodplain meadows and what Rhys is doing in his upland farm can actually work together to prevent flooding in towns and communities as well. Because obviously it's the people generally in the towns that once they'll start feeling the effects of the flooding if our farmers aren't kind of managing water very well. So we've got a few kind of questions that we've got lined up already. I'll just ask a couple myself first, and then we'll move on to the questions from the audience. So, one of the things that you were kind of mentioning, Pete, there, and some of the others is around kind of working together and co-designing schemes across different boundaries. Pete, you were working on common land. Debbie, I think you have water coming onto your farm from different catchment areas as well, and with different water authorities. And Rhys, you're obviously working with a big group. It's just wondering if you could all touch on how you went about kind of organising those sorts of things and what people might be needing to think about in terms of their co-designing schemes across different boundaries, whether that be farm boundaries or kind of catchment boundaries.
Shall I start with a response? Interesting at T-Bay. T-Bay is now in its 15th year, and we started that ball rolling really when NFM was just really starting to be talked about at some kind of scale. We designed the scheme as a way of the common actually being funded for the work it was doing. And so we've taken areas out of grazing and put them behind a fence and planted trees. And then we took the opportunity of measuring that. And so we've done biodiversity surveys, which is really key to the outcomes for me. But we also had Lancaster University coming up and doing some studies with us. And we've done similar things now in Yorkshire with other people. So in other words, it was in tandem. And what's great is we've actually shown that we can collaborate with farmers at scale. They're on board, and that's great. We're coming to a new scheme. We've got to go back and do that again. They're all on board. So that's collaboration has worked. The nature response is fantastic. So we can tick that box as well. And we've also got the research behind us that shows it works for flooding and water management. So in a sense, we've used this as an exemplar. And now we've got these exemplars, I think we can go forward and talk to other people with real hard works experience. And before, quite a lot of this was probably a little bit academic. But now we can show this works. And I think that taking people up there and looking at it is really powerful. And we do a lot of that.
Debbie or Rhys, do you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to talk about our project. So yeah, first of all, kind of really kind of appreciative of the staff at the Eryri National Park. They're sort of a lot of them farm themselves. They've got a really good kind of working relationship with the local agricultural community within the park. So that was kind of, I think, a big positive for our project. So it came about really. I think this was kind of European Union money. I think that needed to be spent very quickly. So the project was quite kind of fleet of foot, more so than your kind of typical government scheme, to be honest with you. And it's one of the best schemes I've been involved with, but we're unlikely to replicate it in the future just because schemes in their nature, I think, are quite kind of bureaucratic. But this was a kind of a breath of fresh air, really. I'm not sure whether I should say this, but like it wasn't a particularly kind of competitive process because the money needs to be spent fairly quickly. The staff of the national park wanted to undertake this work with a group of farmers, and we were a kind of a group when we don't really have kind of official farm cluster groups in Wales, similar to what you might have in England, but like kind of people knew that we were close and we worked together. We gather the hills together, kind of for shearing and kind of different times of the year. So we're a kind of a close-knit community, and we had put in a previous bid for Welsh Government Sustainable Management Scheme Fund, which wasn't accepted. So the staff were aware of that, so they kind of came to us, and basically we had a cup of tea and a cake at T Cerrig Farm in the shed, and the staff from the park said, like, this is the scheme. It's kind of linked to water quality, natural flood defence. These are the kind of actions that we can support you to implement on your farm. If you're interested, let us know. Just create a really kind of rough map of what we'd like to do and where. So we sent that to the project officer, who then came back to us, and kind of we just ground truthed it, kind of walked the farm with the project officer. So it's really good to have that kind of face-to-face local contact. And as a result of that, actually, kind of we put some more options in because there was things that I hadn't considered, like the pond, for example. And the officer was like, well, that's a really good place to put a pond. Oh, I hadn't considered that. So the pond that went in as a result of that kind of walkover. And then the staff from the national park sort of quantified it all, kind of budgeted it, see how much did it cost, and then on the back of that, then we kind of prioritized the kind of key stuff that we wanted to do based on the money available, and it was great. It was, the planning was really kind of, as I say, fleet of foot, and really smooth. And someone had asked the question around, which I've typed the answer for, around kind of planning permissions and stuff, consents and derogations. That was all sorted really by the project officer, and which was kind of invaluable for us really, because they'd sorted out the SSI consent to block the ditches on the hill, the consent from the local authority to put the pond in, the ecological survey, and derogation from the Glasgow agri-environment scheme to put the pond in, because that field parcel was in an existing scheme, which kind of prevented digging up vegetation. So it was great. It took away a lot of the kind of thinking and bureaucracy away from the farmer, basically. And I think that kind of facilitator role is kind of invaluable. And even whilst we were kind of doing the work, there were a few areas where we kind of thought, actually, like, this isn't the best place practically to put a fence in. And now that we're actually here and kind of putting stuff in the ground, and they were happy to sort of say, like, forget about that, you can put it somewhere else. So there was flexibility afforded, even when we'd signed the contract, which was great. So kind of, yeah, nothing but kind of positivity really. The only downside, I guess, no kind of management payment associated, with the work, but kind of you would expect, the upcoming sustainable farming scheme in Wales to pay for the kind of ongoing management of the habitats that we've created really. But no, I think it was a great blueprint of how to run kind of a collaborative landscape scale scheme.
I was going to say, part of our kind of catchment, we have a facilitation. I can't say the word facilitation fund group, Seven Vale Guardians, and that was I think started 2019 or something like that, and it led into a Green Recovery Challenge project called Flourishing Floodplains, which having that group of people together and having people who know the area, kind of almost these projects come up and they need to kind of be oven ready almost. So if you're going to do something, but like Rhys was saying that he'd applied for some funding and it didn't happen, but then the next point came and they knew what it is. It's almost having that group of people together and kind of knowing the area allowed that to happen. And that Flourishing Floodplains project restored meadows and ponds, created some new ponds. There's quite a lot of surveying work went on, but also farmer interaction and training events to do with floodplains and meadows, and it was a really useful project. Kind of feel at the moment we're starting another facilitation fund group, but it's not really got off the ground much at the moment. Have the odd event, but it's trying to, I suppose, keep people together over one objective. So we'll see what comes in the future.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear that it takes quite a lot of local effort in order to get these things off the ground. One of the other points I think a few people have raised this are sort of some of the barriers in terms of kind of mindset shifting. I think Rhys, you've mentioned kind of bureaucracy as well, and in some ways you have as well, Debbie, with trying to get the facilitation groups off the ground. Are there any other barriers that you kind of see with basically getting uptake of these interventions, and kind of how you have gone? And Rhys, it sounds like it was the National Park were great with your group, but are there ways around some of these barriers to uptake?
Yeah, I mean the sort of this INRS scheme that we put in now, like, kind of the biggest barrier there probably is there's not enough funding. The kind of scheme was oversubscribed really, and that's it's the same situation with the new Ffermio Bro scheme in Wales, which is the kind of the Welsh equivalent to the FIPL scheme, farming in protected landscape. So that's been oversubscribed. So there's a high demand for these schemes. Farmers, I think, are happy to implement a lot of these kind of measures on the farms, but at the moment, it's potentially you could say there's not enough investment within from government to actually kind of fund and meet the demand. So yeah, I think that's a big one. Also potentially a kind of cost of materials and stuff of kind of for fencing, and then kind of ongoing management like kind of hedge laying, other stuff like even kind of maybe not linked to natural flood management like dry stone wall restoration, like very costly kind of interventions to kind of maintain these habitats. And sometimes you will struggle to kind of make any profit out the work. So I think that is probably one of the criticism of our scheme, that it's very difficult to kind of to make any money out of the work. Like we were lucky in that myself, my dad, and my brother were kind of we were able to do most of the fencing work kind of in-house ourselves. But then, and I think we made like a profit of something like £2,000 or something. But like when you actually factor in the time that went into it, it's less than minimum wage really. So it's not really a profit. Whilst other farmers, didn't have the time or the kind of the workforce on the farm, so they had to get contractors to do it all. And you might you're lucky then to kind of break even and be kind of cost neutral. So yeah, that's another element maybe why there's not much uptick. And particularly in Wales, I think there's been a lot kind of waiting around to see what the sustainable farming scheme will look like and what you have to do for that and what the payment rates are within the SFS before jumping onto kind of schemes that exist now.
Mhm.
If I may jump in, Lottie, I
Yeah, of
think
course.
I think seeing is believing. So we have, I think, more and better examples now of what happens when you do this at scale. The cluster groups are great. Going talking to one-to-one with farmers is fantastic. I think farmers showing farmers is always more effective than somebody like me going along who's not a farmer. But yeah, we have got so many more examples now of this working, and I think there is a drip, drip, drip. What I hope is that actually we kind of get to the point where the sort of nature-friendly farming aspects, like mob grazing, like the tall, longer covers, that starts to become more normalized and more thought through and actually becomes what people are doing. And that in itself brings some of these benefits automatically. So almost kind of that we don't have to think, oh, we're doing natural flood management today. It's that actually we're managing our farms differently. So if we put more trees in for climate change outcome, more browse, more shade, more shelter, that will impact on our natural flood management and water storage. So the kind of hope is that we get there through your work, your NFN work, really. I think that will give us a lot of wins that we can all buy into, and it's less sectored then. That's my hope.
No, that's a a good hope, I think. Um, Rhys, we've had a question in the Q&A bit, which is how did you prioritize the interventions to maximize the positive ecological outcomes?
Ooh, good question. I guess, yeah, kind of we tried to balance the outcomes really, kind of in the main it was kind of linked to water quality and natural flood defense, but kind of trying to make it work for the farmer as well and in a way that didn't, have a negative effect on biodiversity. So I don't think we set out to kind of achieve the maximum ecological benefits, but I think on the whole like the interventions that we did put in, we kind of used native local species for the hedge planting, undertook like ecological surveys to make sure like where we put the ponds there weren't any kind of existing special habitats or species. And the same with the kind of tree planting as well. Actually, one negative effect has been Japanese knotweed, kind of establishing on the riparian corridors. So, where it was previously grazed up to the riverbank by sheep mainly. Now it's been fenced off. The knotweed has kind of has come back full force. So that's one of the kind of consequences, and something I would kind of think of in the future as well. Maybe kind of allowing uh, a wider buffer strip, but maybe allowing kind of space for grazing animals to go in to basically kind of try and prevent the establishment of non-native species as well. So yeah, it was overall trying to get that kind of balance and how it works for the farmer, biodiversity, carbon, and all the other benefits that I mentioned, really.
I guess that's one of the benefits of doing projects like this. You kind of learn things like that, which then hopefully through webinars like this we can pass on to other people as well, so that they don't fall into the same sorts of traps.
I think the main thing was that there were kind of measures in place to ensure that we didn't have a detrimental effect on the ecology and biodiversity.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of sticking with some of the benefits, we've had a question for Debbie, but I think it might kind of work out for everyone can answer a little bit if they've seen any other benefits, because I think, Pete, there was a question for you around drought as well. But Debbie, the question really was around are there benefits that you see evidence in the health of your cows from kind of the hay due to the diversity of herbs and minerals within the hay from the floodplain, and the kind of flood meadow fields. But I guess then, yeah, as a wider question of Pete, have you seen any other kind of wider benefits as well, like drought mitigation? And Rhys, if you want to come in on that as well.
Yeah, so I think it's hard. We haven't done like an experiment where they've not had the hay for always. My dad always insisted that everything had hay from the meadows whenever they were housed. So I haven't really got like a before and after, because it's just always that's how the farm's been. But we do notice when you've got the stock that are grazing on the meadows in like the autumn compared to the stock that are elsewhere. I think anecdotally they always look better, and they always seem to do really well down on those meadows. And they will break into the most diverse fields if you try to shut them out. They like, the fields that the botanists think are good fields, the cows also agree. So, but other benefits, I just think trying to improve the soil, you just see those benefits from better soil. I was walking out in a field yesterday after we had quite a lot of rain, and field that's been permanent pasture always, I could walk out there with shoes and walked into the next field that has only been 2 years down to grass, and you needed wellies and you were splashing around. So that infiltration and that difference, you're just noticing, and that improved. We've still got cattle out now on that permanent pasture, despite the rain. So yeah, I think that improving soil health I've noticed.
And did you see last year during the kind of drought conditions that your grass was performing better, say, than perhaps someone that wasn't managing the soils as well?
Yeah, the meadows were green all summer, where everybody else was burnt off. And there was water. What's lovely, there was still water in the ditches in some of those meadows, and some of the ponds were still held water. So you had kind of more wildlife down there because they were going where there was something for them. And the other thing I noticed is leaving the longer covers, that help. So I did top fields and stuff in that drought, so that you still seem to get some growth underneath, because it was kind of that microclimate of longer covers, and things like the kestrels and everything like that. We're really happy that there were covers there for things for them. So yeah, there's kind of side benefits, I suppose, of doing these things.
It strikes me that if nature is responding to what they're seeing and finding, then we're doing the right things. because they have to survive in the same space we do. So if you've got more moisture in a field and in summer, that's where wildlife's going to be because they have the survival thing. Um, yeah, we've got I think it's one or two questions here about evidence almost that are coming in. I've got people we go and see regularly, and they say, "Look at my field; it's nice and green. Look at my neighbours; it's brown." And there's one who'll be mob grazing or tall grass grazing, and the next door neighbour will be set stocked, and you can see it. It's visceral in the landscape in the summer. We've got that. We do need, I think, collectively to evidence that a bit more, and actually have those photographs. I was looking through photographs that I've got, and none of my photographs exactly tell the story I want. So I think we do need to evidence and continually think about the story we're trying to tell, and try and make sure we got photographs and evidence behind that. But everyone's busy and it's always a challenge to do that. But there's one question here about could we survive? Could we do this stuff, or would we invest in it without support from DEFRA? And I think that's where this evidence comes in. If your farm is easier to manage, you said, Rhys, with your fences. I know they're expensive to put in. If you've got grass all the way through the summer in a drought condition and your stock are healthier and happier, then that's the kind of evidence we need to gather to be able to persuade farmers, anybody land managing, to do this stuff without support. Because that time might come when we don't have support for this. And we need to get there first, not be late on the train, really.
Yeah, just on the evidence bit, that's what we're kind of hoping if our INRS scheme gets accepted, that kind of will be kind of baselining soil health, doing kind of infiltration rates, visual analysis of the soil. Kind of when you think about soil testing, kind of it's typically chemical analysis. It's looking at NPK and pH, and maybe soil kind of organic matter, but kind of I'm keen to kind of baseline with a spade test. Where's the compaction layer, what are the roots
Yeah.
looking like, how dense are they, how deep do they go, how much water can I infiltrate, during winter, during a drought period, and as we kind of slowly change the system, and the way we graze, our livestock, hopefully you'll kind of see improvements in every single metric, but not kind of just there, like kind of how much grass, we could be measuring how much grass we grow as well, kind of, do with your eye, or something like a plate meter or something like that. So yeah, it's all about kind of building that kind of business case, if you like, for implementing a lot of these solutions.
And is it something, Rhys, that you think you would be doing without, or you maybe would have been considering without the Welsh Government support there?
I mean, every farm is different, isn't it? I kind of, I would love to be able to say, we could do this without support. I do farm in a very kind of marginal piece of, place in Wales, and I think kind of half the farm is kind of SSI designated site, so we're kind of restricted in how much livestock we can actually carry on the farm. It's very kind of steep slopes, kind of rocky. It's not the easiest place to farm. So actually, kind of making a living solely off selling meat, it can be a bit of a challenge there. But I think if you can kind of link the support payments from the government to these kind of environmental outcomes, then I think it's a win-win for everyone, and it gives farmers the security as well to go for it, and to be afford to be a bit braver, knowing there's a payment there to kind of, if things don't work out, because inevitably, like, everyone has plans, and you kind of think, this is what will happen. The rainfall simulator picture I showed up, this is what I'm hoping, but it might not turn out like that. There might be kind of logistical issues there which prevents me from doing it. So having that support, particularly the capital work support, is really important. But I think that's the best way, I think, of kind of continuing expenditure, public expenditure within farming. We're now competing as an industry, as a sector, with transport and health, education. So the kind of business as usual case might not kind of float with governments any longer. So if we can link the payments to multiple kind of societal benefits, as well as producing food, then I think we're onto a winner.
And just a question for all of you, because we've had a few around the kind of financial support. Are we all in favour of the private sector also getting involved in some of the kind of investing in natural flood management as well, and it not just being kind of public sector funding? I'm thinking
Yes.
like planning developers as well. Debbie, I know that I think we had a chat in a previous call around this topic, hadn't we, around the impact that housing developments can have for flooding and flooding on farmland in particular. So, yeah, I guess this may be a bit more directed towards you for that question then.
Yeah, no, I think so. We don't get any help from private at the moment, but I notice that we get, for the same amount of rain, we'll get the flash flooding happening more often now. And I think that's just because there's thousands more houses being built upstream, although they're meant to have suds or whatever the things to relieve flooding. I don't think it really does everything it should do. And yeah, I think potentially also kind of insurance companies and things like that. If you're taking water so that houses and things don't flood, can can you be helped? I don't know how that can be facilitated, but I feel like there should be a way of if it's impacting you to help other people, then getting some funding for that would be a good thing.
I'm going to dive in a kind of career limiting way. I think what successive governments have wanted is the private sector to step up. And I fear that we will have a cherry picking system if that's the case, and there'll be pretty projects that people like, and there'll be ugly projects that people don't like. And if we want to make this work, and it's the same with wildlife, and I think NFO and wildlife are very much in the same space. If we want a connected, joined up, Lawton principles wildlife landscape, we have to have hedges, ditches, ponds, mountainsides with heather and flowers on. We need to have changed grazing. There's lots of things we need to do for nature, which will have a massive impact on water storage, whether that's in flooding situations or drought. A system which allows us to cherry pick the nice, pretty projects, which I think is where probably some of the BNG type things will go, is not going to give us that connected landscape. And I really fear that trying to chase the private sector money is driving a huge amount of government time and energy away from actually doing cheap, small interventions on every farm, supporting the farmers to do that, which we know they're cheap. Rhys said he's not paying himself minimum wage. It's a cheap way of delivering fencing, really. So why are we not going for that? That seems to me the way forward, rather than trying to rely on private sector. And I still have yet to find private sector people investing in lots of money in the right place. As I said, that might be career limiting from my perspective. And anyone can disagree with me if they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I'm quite kind of skeptical of the kind of private sector, I guess, and the kind of motives, I guess, behind some of the kind of interventions that they may pay for, particularly with kind of offsetting. What does that mean? Is it kind of someone just paying farmers to do some activity in order to kind of continue to pollute, and kind of there's something that kind of doesn't sit right with me there. But to some extent, there's an element of inevitability that we have to kind of rely on the private sector in some instances. I think there's a piece of work that was done by Matt Raymond on the kind of scale of need and how much it kind of costs for kind of the governments across the UK to deliver on their environmental targets. Basically, I think kind of in Wales that was kind of figured into the tune of £600 million or something. Kind of which is kind of government aren't willing to cough up that money for that purposes at the moment. So in the absence of that funding gap, will be kind of you do look at the private sector for it, but I think it needs to be kind of regulated and farmers advised, what does it actually mean to be involved in schemes with the private sector as well, particularly around sort of carbon offsetting. There's no legal requirements for your kind of farms to be carbon neutral at the moment. There's an industry target, but for an individual farm business, there's no kind of legal target. But there might be in the future, who knows? And if you kind of sell your carbon credits to someone else, well, you kind of no longer own that carbon, or you can't kind of use that carbon to offset your own emissions. So there's things like that are always in the back of my mind when I think about kind of private investments.
Mm. And we have a question actually as well around kind of farm advice and contractors and land agents. And do you feel that they have enough knowledge on the resilience benefits of NFM and soil management approaches to kind of be able to provide potentially that advice to farmers that they need around these kind of initiatives and things? So I don't know if Rhys, you want to...
Yeah, I can jump in there. They're not. I mentioned that the staff from the Eryri National Park, the farmers themselves, so you kind of get it, or they're closely linked to the farming community, which is a great place to start. We put on a lot of kind of knowledge exchange events, as part of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and whilst they're kind of in the main aimed at farmers, we do get kind of quite a lot of farm advisors joining, our webinars or face-to-face events. And I think that, that's great. I think that's a sign of success, because, you might get kind of 20 farmers at an event, so you kind of directly engage with 20 farmers. But if you get 10 farmers and 10 farm advisors, they speak together. Those farm advisors will then maybe over the course of the year talk to 100 farmers each. So the kind of message and expertise and skills they learn kind of is disseminated and shared kind of more widely. So I think from my experience with the NFFN, it's something that is that kind of project officer staff. I think they're investing quite a bit, in upskilling the knowledge of project officers, which is great.
Anyone else want to comment on that, Pete? Is that something that you see as well with your work on the Commons?
I'd say it's a mixed bag, and I think one of the difficulties we have is that there's an awful lot of knowledge to take on board. So for someone in a busy office to take on board the breadth of experience again, a land management farmer would have practical experience, knowledge of where water is on land, etc. It's a lifetime of learning. I think it's quite challenging for us to expect people to take this on board relatively quickly. So I think there's a lot to learn in the space. So, but I think knowledge of natural flood management, knowledge of wildlife is getting better. But if you set it against, you've asked one question was about land agents. If you set it against that kind of financial or tenancy or those sort of legal sides of things, then I suspect this doesn't feature very highly for quite a few people. So we do have to share the knowledge we've all got in amongst groups that are willing to listen to us and learn from us, I think, really. I think it's a mixed bag.
If I could just kind of add as well, I think the way we kind of regenerative farming and kind of graze and rest and kind of rotational mob grazing, which we've talked about now, kind of, you could argue, kind of contrary or flies in the face of kind of your traditional view on nature conservation, which is more kind of extensive set stocking, kind of low density, and the kind of all of a sudden kind of changing a system to something that is kind of intense period of grazing and then moving on to kind of an extended period of rest, which kind of I could probably kind of those working in nature conservation across the last decades wouldn't really advocate for, but kind of we've seen how it can improve kind of all kind of aspects of environmental health, really. So there's a big mindset change, I guess, as well. And I'm currently reading Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil book, and he's so articulate in the way he kind of conveys what he's done and the benefits, but like himself says constantly throughout the book, I was taught not to do this. I was taught kind of to do it a certain way, kind of solutions in a bag sort of thing, and that's the way farmers, I guess, are being pushed through, in the past through policies, advice, academia as well, colleges and educational establishments. So always kind of mindful of that when anyone sort of talks about the effect of farming on nature and the environment. Kind of farmers really have just been following what government advisors and experts have been telling them to do. So there's a bit of a mindset change that comes with that as well.
But just on that general theme, it's great to see groundswell happening. It's great to see the farming conference, the Oxford Real Farming Conference, carbon calling in Cumbria, where people are sharing these experiences now just to lots and lots of people. That's really heartwarming, I think. And the work that I can't say it, NFFN do too. There's a much better appreciation of these things now.
Yeah, I think people are beginning. I think there's a bit of a movement now, isn't there, towards that?
Yeah,
And
let's hope so.
everything along those, everything that you just mentioned, Pete, is helping with that, and you too, Rhys. So we have a couple of other questions kind of around what to say to people who think that the best way to alleviate flooding is to kind of dredge, straighten out, get the water off their land as quickly as possible. So as a kind of takeaway tip, basically.
Well, yeah, it's always the argument people have said, it's flooded because you haven't dredged the rivers. Well, it always used to be cleaned out. They always, we didn't get the flooding. And it may be at the end you need to, if there's water in a town and it's right next to a big river, then dredging it to get it out. But normally it's better not for the water not to get there. So yeah, I think you have to show them this whole talk really, to explain why you don't, dredging rivers doesn't solve flooding problems.
It maybe just moves them from your
it just moves them from one area to another. Yeah, exactly. So you need to hold that water somewhere, and ideally you want to hold it in the soil where it falls. Yeah.
There are some great things. There are these sort of sand pits you get, which Rivers Trust have got. We've done some wonderful work with Rivers Trusts up here, Loon, West Cumbria Rivers Trust, Eden Rivers Trust, brilliant organisations. They've got some of this stuff. They model it. They can show it. There's some fantastic wee films. There's one by an environment agency which shows you in cartoon form what happens when you do X, Y, and Z. It's just evidence sharing again and again and again. However, it's complicated. And in one part of a river, you might need to dredge around an asset. Somewhere else, you want to store that water. It's complex. And I think that's the difficulty with it. You can't just have one simple, powerful comment. It's much more detailed than that. But storing water works for flooding. It also works for droughts. And that's the killer thing. We have to go back to people and say, look, if we get rid of all our water in the winter and we don't have any left for the summer, where are we going to be? And I think it is a complicated story, but we need to slow down, be brave, and talk about it.
Yeah, I think that kind of keeping the water in the soil is the main challenge, I think. I think we're working very closely with Niels Caulfield, who's a regenerative farming soil health expert, and we're in the process of completing sort of a weatherproof farming booklet or a kind of guide for farmers, basically, that talks about kind of a lot of the principles we've talked about today, and I think there's a lot of what's the word, kind of a misconception around kind of during periods of drought. Kind of a lot of the kind of issues with grass burning off, it isn't necessarily a lack of rain, but kind of a lack of soil moisture. And kind of Niels always says kind of you can be kind of poached in March and then parched in May. That kind of the water that kind of falls on your land, like it showed in that the rainfall simulator, like it doesn't stay in the soil. So like kind of the long-term soil moisture is compromised, and then when you get that kind of period of drought, kind of it just dries up. So I like kind of the test, two tests really, is to do like a spade test when it's really really wet, and you can see kind of where the compaction layer is, and probably below the kind of underneath or below the compaction layer, it's actually the soil will be quite dry, I think, which means that the kind of the land really isn't inundated. It's just kind of it just can't can't hold it. But there are ways to go around that.
Well, I think with the interest of time, considering we've not got long left before the end, we'll kind of do one final question, which is um, if you could leave people with one kind of key thing that they could take away and do on their own farm as a result of this webinar, or take out as an advisor to people that they're working with, what would that one kind of key thought be from each of you? Who wants to go first? Rhys?
I'll go first. I think just kind of keep an open mind. Talk to other farmers. Kind of go to kind of knowledge sharing events. Doesn't have to be the NFFN. Could be anyone. And kind of read up on some of the kind of interventions, particularly kind of I guess the regenerative grazing elements that we've talked about today, because that is kind of it can be quite daunting, because that's a system change, isn't it? Kind of the interventions that we put in, like peatland restoration and ponds and hedgerow management and creation. There's stuff that we can do, in field or on the edges without kind of compromising the system or kind of, necessarily changing the way we farm. But, kind of the grazing, regenerative grazing system, that is a different mindset altogether. So it's kind of talk to farmers who are doing it, see what the benefits are. I've yet to talk to a farmer who kind of regrets doing it, to be honest with you. And hopefully, in a few years' time, when we put our system in place, I'll be able to kind of talk about the benefits as well from a personal experience.
Pete, do you want to go next?
What I want to say is going to take an hour, so I'm just trying to think about how I do it quickly. I agree with Rhys. I think grazing, and I'm in the okay. We're talking grazing side, and there's lots of arable farmers out there as well. I know less about that. Grazing changes are going to facilitate the best bang for your buck, I think, in terms of soil quality and soil health. It will also improve the health and well-being of your animals, and the quality of the meat you're producing. I think grazing's got a huge amount to go for it in terms of natural flood management and soil health, and the health of the farmer, and the health of the food that comes off it, and the health of the environment around it. If you're using less wormers, you're not putting fertilizer on, you're using your soils better, carrying capacity, you're going to earn more money as well. There's a huge amount in there that's really positive. And I think absolutely let's get behind that. But I would say one of the questions was about beavers. And I think the beaver thing is really interesting because it's going to really rile up some people. But what are they doing? They're building dams which hold back water but allow it to filtrate through the landscape. If you think like a beaver, even if you don't want one, you think about storing that, allowing it to go, creating more mess in the landscape, more structure in the landscape. It will help you in terms of storing water for the drought situation and the flood situation. So it is thinking about the structure of the landscape. If it's bald and flat and an inch high, it's not going to do anybody any good. So think about mess, think about structure, think about your soils and your soil health.
Debbie.
I think they've stolen all my things I was going to say. But I think I was going to say that actually what you can do that can help natural flood management, and which will normally help nature as well, actually helps you as a farm to be more resilient, and can save you money, can save you stress, and make farming a nicer thing to do. So if you're not stressed because you haven't got grass in a drought, or you can keep your stock out longer, things you can do that will help other things, have side benefits. So yeah.
No, I think that's all really good points. Kind of talk to other people that are already doing it, kind of try and gather that evidence together, think about what you're actually doing on your own farm and how it might have multiple different benefits as well, not just for flooding, but for drought and other business resilience and everything else. But just kind of get out there, get researching, and get talking to people really. So hopefully, from this evening, you've gained a bit of an understanding of natural flood management, what it is and how it works in practice, an understanding of some of the natural flood management solutions, how we can kind of scale up the impact and working at catchment scales, and how individual interventions can kind of combine to deliver catchment-wide benefits, and then understanding about who benefits from and the shared advantages of natural flood management as well, and some actionable steps that you could integrate onto your own farm or advise farmers to integrate onto their farms as well. We will be sending out the recording of this to everyone that signed up, and as I mentioned before, it'll also be on our YouTube channel as well. We are going to be sending out a feedback survey as well. It'd be great if you could fill that out, because it just goes as a bit of information on what you found useful and other topics that you might like to see from us in the future as well. So we'll send that out with it as well. And any resources or any bits of information that were mentioned, so stuff around the SFI, Rhys mentioned the SFS and a few other different funding options, we'll also send that out in a kind of resource pack to everybody that signed up too, just for more information. But on that note, thank you very much everyone for attending. Really great to have such great questions from everybody tonight. And thank you very much for your time, and thank you to all of our wonderful speakers as well.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye.